A hospital room is supposed to protect the living. But that night, under the cold fluorescence of the ICU, Hunter Cross stood at his wife's bedside and spoke as if Lydia were already a memory. Beside him, Claire Whitmore didn't cry. She calculated. They discussed timelines, insurance, legal control. A nurse paused outside the door, just long enough to hear something that didn't belong in a room like this. Lydia did not move. They believed that meant she was gone. They were wrong. If you believe silence can hide the truth, stay with this story. Don't miss what happens when someone chooses to listen instead of speak. And before we go further, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Subscribe if you believe some truths deserve to be witnessed, not ignored. Lydia Cross had always understood that silence was not emptiness. It was structure. It was control. It was where truth revealed itself if one knew how to listen long enough. She had built her life around that belief. In another version of her story, the one most people saw Lydia was composed, capable, and unremarkable in the way competence often goes unnoticed. She worked in financial compliance for a mid-sized firm in Northern Virginia, the kind of job that required precision memory and a tolerance for details others found tedious. She was the person colleagues relied on when something didn't add up. Not because she spoke the loudest, but because she noticed what others missed. She noticed patterns. She noticed absence. She noticed when numbers told a different story than people did. At home, she carried that same quiet awareness into her marriage. Hunter Cross was by all outward measures a man who inspired confidence. He moved easily through rooms, knew how to hold eye contact, just long enough how to speak with assurance without appearing forceful. He worked in private investment consulting, nothing flashy, but close enough to influence that people deferred to him. He was the kind of man who remembered names, sent timely messages, and stood slightly closer than necessary when speaking, creating the illusion of intimacy. To most, he was dependable. To Lydia, he was precise in a different way. He curated himself. In the early years of their marriage, Lydia had interpreted that precision as care. Hunter remembered details about her schedule, anticipated her needs, even adjusted his tone, depending on her mood. He brought her coffee before she asked. He scheduled dinners without being reminded. He made their life look seamless. But over time, Lydia began to notice something else. Not what he did, what he omitted. There were pauses in conversation where there shouldn't have been, gaps between explanations that felt too clean, moments where he seemed to arrive at a conclusion without showing how he got there. And Lydia, who understood that truth often lived in those gaps, began to pay closer attention. She did not confront him. She did not accuse. She documented. It started small. An email left open on a shared tablet closed too quickly when she entered the room. A banking notification that disappeared before she could read it fully. A change in password protocols, he explained casually, as if it were routine. Security update, he had said once without looking up. She had nodded. And later that night, she wrote it down. Not in a dramatic way, not as evidence of wrongdoing, just a note. Date, time, what changed. She never framed it as suspicion. That would have required certainty. And Lydia preferred patterns to certainty. Claire Whitmore, her younger sister, entered the picture more frequently around that time. Claire had always been a contrast to Lydia, where Lydia was measured. Claire was expressive. Where Lydia observed, Claire reacted. She had a way of filling space with warmth, of making people feel included, even when she didn't fully understand them. It had made her easy to love growing up. It had also made her difficult to read. After a series of unstable jobs and a brief engagement that ended quietly, Claire began visiting more often. At first, it was explained as temporary. She needed a place to regroup, to think, to find direction. Lydia welcomed her. Of course she did. Family to Lydia was not something negotiated. It was something maintained. Claire brought noise into the house, music in the afternoons, laughter that carried too far, conversations that looped and doubled back on themselves. She talked to Hunter easily, without Lydia's restraint, asking questions, teasing him, drawing him into her orbit. Hunter responded, not obviously, not in ways that could be pointed to and named. But Lydia noticed He lingered longer in shared spaces. He laughed more freely when Claire was present. He answered her questions with more detail than necessary. None of it crossed a line, but it approached one. And Lydia, who had spent years understanding how lines blurred before they were crossed, began writing more frequently. Dates, times, interactions. Nothing accusatory, nothing definitive. Just a record. The house itself began to feel different. Not in its structure, but in its rhythm. Conversations shifted when Lydia entered. Not abruptly, but subtly, like a door closing 1 inch further than before. Plans were mentioned after they had already been discussed. Decisions appeared fully formed without the process that usually preceded them. One evening, Lydia returned home earlier than expected. A meeting had been canceled, a detail she had texted Hunter about, though he hadn't responded. When she stepped inside, the house was quiet. Too quiet for a space that had recently held 3 people. She set her bag down, listening. From the kitchen, she heard voices. Hunter and Claire. Low, not urgent, not panicked, but contained. Lydia paused in the hallway, not hiding, not eavesdropping in the traditional sense. Just waiting, the way she always did. "We can't keep doing this here," Claire was saying. Hunter exhaled. "Then don't come over during the day." A pause. Then Claire laughed softly. "You're the one who asked me to." Another pause. Longer this time. Lydia stepped forward, deliberately letting her presence be known before she entered. Claire turned first, smiling too quickly. "Oh, you're home early." Hunter didn't turn right away. When he did, his expression was composed. Measured. As always. "Meeting canceled?" he asked. Lydia nodded. Yes. No one mentioned the conversation. Dinner that night was normal. Carefully normal. Claire talked about a job listing she had seen. Hunter asked questions. Lydia listened. She watched the way Claire avoided looking at her for too long. The way Hunter checked his phone between sentences, then set it down when Lydia's gaze lingered. Nothing happened. And yet, everything had shifted. Later that night, Lydia sat at her desk, a small lamp casting a narrow circle of light over a notebook she rarely left unattended. She opened it, wrote the date, time. Then, in steady handwriting, conversation paused upon entry. Tone controlled. Claire initiated proximity discussion. Hunter deflected. She stopped. Not because she didn't have more to write, but because she understood something now that she hadn't allowed herself to name before. This was no longer a collection of unrelated moments. It was a pattern, and patterns once visible rarely disappeared. They deepened. Over the following weeks, the changes accelerated, but only slightly, just enough to confirm what Lydia already suspected, not enough to alert anyone else. Hunter began taking calls outside. Not every call, just enough. Claire stayed later in the evening, sometimes leaving after Lydia had already gone to bed. Or so they thought. Lydia adjusted her routines. She woke earlier, moved more quietly, left rooms without announcing it, not to catch them, but to understand the structure of what was happening. One afternoon, while reviewing a routine compliance file at work, Lydia noticed something that didn't belong. A financial transfer, small but irregular, not within her company, within a personal account she recognized. Joint, shared, the kind of account used for household expenses. The transaction wasn't large enough to trigger concern for most people. But Lydia didn't measure significance by size. She measured it by deviation. And this deviated. She printed the record, folded it once, placed it in her bag. She did not confront Hunter that evening. She did not ask Claire anything. Instead, she watched, listened, and continued writing. Because Lydia Cross understood something that neither Hunter nor Claire had accounted for. They believed secrecy required silence. They believed absence of confrontation meant absence of awareness. They believed stillness meant ignorance. They were wrong. Lydia was not silent because she didn't know. She was silent because she was learning. And what she was learning would eventually leave no space for denial, not for them, not anymore. The morning Lydia Cross was taken to the hospital began without disruption. That more than anything would stay with her later, the absence of warning, the ordinary precision of the hours before everything shifted. Hunter had left earlier than usual, though not so early it required explanation. He mentioned a client breakfast meeting, something about timing and traffic. Lydia had nodded already, halfway through reviewing a set of flagged transactions on her laptop. Claire was still asleep, or at least that was what Lydia assumed. The house had been quiet in that particular way that follows a late night subdued, heavy with the residue of conversations that had ended but not resolved. Lydia moved through her routine with the same consistency she always maintained. Coffee, email, notes, a brief glance at her calendar. There was nothing unusual scheduled, nothing that suggested interruption. And yet by mid-morning, Lydia would be lying at the base of the staircase, her body still her mind, already beginning to separate from what the world would soon declare her condition to be. The fall, as it would later be described, was simple, accidental, a misstep. That was the version Hunter gave when he arrived. But Lydia would remember it differently. Not as a fall, as a sequence. She had gone upstairs to retrieve a file she had left in the study, a printed set of financial records she intended to review more closely. The staircase in their home curved gently, a design feature chosen more for aesthetics than function. Lydia had walked it hundreds of times. She did not trip. She did not lose balance. What she remembered clearly, distinctly, was the sensation just before. A brief, disorienting lightness. Not dizziness exactly, but absence. As if something in her body had paused without permission. Her hand had reached for the railing, missed. Then the world tilted. There had been no time to correct, no time to react, only the impact. And then sound. Not silence. Sound that felt distant but present. A voice, Claire's, sharp, not frightened, alert. Hunter, the rest blurred. When Hunter arrived, he was calm. That detail would later be repeated by the paramedics, by the attending nurse, even by the doctor who first reviewed her chart. He was very composed, someone would say, as if composure were evidence of innocence, as if panic were the only appropriate response to catastrophe. Hunter provided information clearly. Timeline, location, events. She must have slipped. She didn't mention feeling unwell. She fell down the stairs. His voice carried no urgency, only structure. Claire stood nearby, her expression arranged into something resembling distress. Her hands trembled slightly, but not uncontrollably. Her breathing was uneven, but not erratic. She cried at the appropriate moments, not before, not after, only when observed. Lydia would not see any of this, but she would hear parts of it, through layers, through distance, through something that felt like being suspended just beneath the surface of consciousness. The ambulance ride was fragmented, voices overlapping, instructions, vitals, words that didn't connect, unresponsive. Possible head trauma, keep monitoring. And beneath it all, Lydia felt something else. Awareness, not full, not controlled, but present, like a current she couldn't yet direct. At the hospital, the narrative settled quickly. Patients like Lydia, unresponsive, stable, but uncertain, were categorized efficiently. There were protocols, assessments, observations. She was placed in a monitored room. Machines translated her body into numbers. Numbers replaced her voice. Hunter signed forms. Claire made calls. Information spread outward, controlled and curated. An accident, they said. She's in critical condition. We don't know when she'll wake. And for a time, hours, maybe longer, Lydia drifted. Not asleep, not awake, suspended. Until something shifted. It was not dramatic. No sudden clarity. No sharp return. Just a moment where the fog thinned enough for a single realization to form she could hear. Not everything, not clearly. But enough. Voices came first, filtered, muffled, then gradually more defined. We'll need to monitor neurological response. Families should be prepared. These cases can take time. Doctors, nurses, neutral voices, professional distance. Then Hunter, closer, lower. She'll recover. A pause. A doctor responding carefully. It's too early to say. There are positive signs, but we need to observe. Another pause. Could she remain like this? The question was framed clinically, but Lydia felt something beneath it. Not fear, not hope, calculation. The doctor hesitated. It's possible, but not something we assume this early. Hunter thanked him. Calm, measured. Footsteps receded. Time passed. Lydia could not measure it, only sense its movement through changes in light, in sound, in the rhythm of voices entering and leaving. Claire's voice appeared more frequently. She spoke on the phone, softly, then louder when necessary. She's stable. Yes, they're monitoring. No, there's no change yet. Each update was controlled, consistent, rehearsed. Lydia listened, not actively at first, but gradually, intentionally. She focused, separated voices, tracked patterns. And then sometime deep into what felt like night, the room changed. Quieter, fewer interruptions, footsteps lighter, a door closing more softly than usual. Two voices, close, Hunter, Claire, neither performing now. No need, no audience. Claire spoke first. She didn't say anything before it happened. Hunter exhaled. No. A pause. Then quieter. She was starting to notice things. Another pause. Longer. Claire's voice lowered. You said it would be later. I said it would be handled, Hunter replied. His tone did not rise. It didn't need to. The certainty in it was enough. Lydia felt something shift inside her. Not physically, not yet, but cognitively, a connection forming between what she had observed before and what she was hearing now. Claire moved slightly fabric against fabric, a small sound. And now, she asked. Hunter didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was even. Now we wait. The words settled into the room, into Lydia, into something deeper than thought. She understood then, not completely, not with all details, but enough. Enough to recognize that this was not an accident in the way it had been described. Not random, not unfortunate, structured, planned, or at least allowed. Her breathing did not change. Her body did not react. But her awareness sharpened, focused. Hunter continued. There's still time. Claire hesitated. For what? Another pause. For everything to align. The phrase was vague, intentionally so. But Lydia, who had spent years interpreting what people avoided saying, understood its weight. This was not about recovery. It was about outcome. Claire shifted again. And if she wakes up, silence. Longer this time, long enough to matter. Then we'll handle that. No emotion, no hesitation. Just certainty. Lydia felt it then. Not fear, not yet. Clarity, cold, precise. The kind she relied on in her work when numbers stopped making sense until they suddenly did. She was not safe. Not in the way patients are assumed to be. Not in the way the hospital represented. Safety, she realized, was not defined by location. It was defined by knowledge. And she had just learned something they did not intend her to hear. Her body remained still, unresponsive. But inside, Lydia Cross made a decision. She would not wake, not yet. Because waking meant exposure, and exposure without proof meant vulnerability. Instead, she would remain where they believed she already was. Silent, unmoving, invisible. And she would listen to every word, every plan, every mistake, until silence was no longer their protection, but hers. Night in the hospital did not bring rest. It brought clarity. The absence of movement, of routine interruption, stripped conversations down to their essential form. Without the presence of doctors, without the choreography of care, people spoke differently, less guarded, less precise. Lydia Cross learned quickly that truth preferred the quiet. Her body remained still beneath the thin hospital blanket machines, translating her into numbers that reassured no one and alarmed no one enough to intervene. To the outside world, she existed in suspension, neither present nor gone. But inside, she was listening with increasing precision. She began to understand the structure of the room through sound alone. The soft hiss of oxygen, the intermittent rhythm of monitors. The subtle distinction between a nurse's measured steps and Hunter's controlled, deliberate pacing. Claire's movements were easier to identify. She shifted often. Fabric brushed against itself. Jewelry clicked faintly when she moved her hands. Lydia cataloged it all. Not because she needed to. Because it gave her control. The first night she heard them clearly, fully, without distortion, was not marked by anything unusual. No raised voices. No sudden revelations. Just the quiet confidence of two people who believed they were unobserved. The door closed softly. A pause. Then Claire exhaled. "I hate this place." Hunter's voice followed low. "Then don't stay." "I have to," she replied quickly. "People expect me to." A faint shift, perhaps. She moved closer to the bed. To Lydia. "You're the husband," Claire added. "You can leave whenever you want." Hunter didn't respond immediately. When he did, his tone was measured. Leaving would raise questions. Claire gave a small, humorless laugh. Questions about what? Another pause. Lydia focused. Every word mattered now. About timing, Hunter said. The words settled heavily. Claire didn't answer right away. When she spoke again, her voice had changed, less performative, more direct. She wasn't supposed to fall like that. The sentence hung in the air. Not speculation, not confusion, statement. Hunter's reply was quiet. It wasn't the plan. Lydia felt the shift again, that internal alignment of fragments she had been collecting for weeks, months, perhaps longer. The fall, the absence before it, the pattern. Claire took a step closer, Lydia guessed from the change in sound. Then what was the plan, she asked. Hunter exhaled slowly. "We were adjusting," he said. "You knew that." "That's not what you told me," Claire replied. Her voice wasn't emotional. It was controlled, frustrated but not surprised. Hunter's tone remained steady. "I told you we needed time." "You said it would be clean," Claire said. "Clean," the word echoed. Lydia did not move. But inside something settled. Not shock, not disbelief, recognition. Claire continued. She was already noticing things, she added. "You said so yourself." I said she was asking questions, Hunter corrected. "That's the same thing," Claire snapped softly. A brief silence followed. Not empty, tense. Lydia tracked the rhythm of their breathing, the subtle shift of weight as they adjusted positions. Then Hunter spoke again. "It doesn't matter now." The calm in his voice was not reassuring. It was final. Claire let out a slow breath. "It matters if she wakes up." There it was, direct, unavoidable, the question that had been circling without being named. Lydia felt the words land inside her with precise clarity. Hunter did not respond immediately. Seconds passed, measured, deliberate. When he finally spoke, his voice was even. "If she wakes up, we adapt." Claire's tone sharpened. "That's not an answer. It's the only one that matters." Hunter replied. Another pause, then softer. "She won't remember everything." The statement was not hopeful. It was strategic. Claire shifted again. "And if she does, this time Hunter's answer came faster. Then we manage it." Lydia understood what that meant. Not in detail, but in intention. Manage, control, contain. The same principles Lydia had watched him apply to every aspect of his life. Business, relationships. Now her. Claire let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh. "You're very calm about this." Hunter didn't react. "I'm realistic," he said. The distinction mattered. To him, to Lydia. Claire moved again, closer still. Lydia could almost feel a presence near her, though her body remained unresponsive. "She trusted you," Claire said quietly. It was not an accusation, not exactly, more like an observation. Hunter's reply was immediate. "She trusted both of us." The correction was subtle, but intentional. Claire didn't respond right away. When she did, her voice had softened, not with guilt, with calculation. "We need to be careful," she said. "We are," Hunter replied. "No," Claire said. "We need to be more careful." A pause. Then, the accounts. Lydia focused harder. Every detail mattered now. Hunter's tone shifted slightly, not defensive, cautious. "They're handled." "That's not what I asked," Claire said. Silence, longer this time. Then Hunter spoke. "They're where they need to be." Claire exhaled slowly. "And the insurance?" Another pause. "Shorter. In process," Hunter said. Lydia felt something cold settle deeper inside her. Insurance, accounts, timing. Words that had once been abstract now formed a structure she could no longer ignore. Claire's voice lowered. "If this doesn't go the way you think it will," Hunter interrupted, not loudly, but firmly enough to end the sentence. Claire didn't push, not directly. Instead, she shifted direction. And the lawyer, Hunter, hesitated, just for a moment. Lydia caught it. "The paperwork is being reviewed," he said. "By who? Someone reliable." Claire let out a quiet breath. "You didn't tell me that." "I don't need to tell you everything," Hunter replied. The edge in his voice was subtle, but present. For the first time, a fracture appeared between them. Small, but real. Claire stepped back. The sound of her movement changed distance, increasing. "Maybe you should," she said. "Maybe you should trust me," Hunter replied. Another silence. Different now, less aligned, more uncertain. Lydia absorbed it all. Not just the words, the tone, the hesitation, the imbalance. This was not a perfect partnership. It was a collaboration built on shifting control. And control, Lydia knew, always left traces. Claire spoke again, quieter now. "I didn't expect it to happen like this." Hunter didn't answer. Claire continued. She was supposed to fade out of it. The phrasing was careful, detached. Hunter's response came after a pause. She still might. The words were simple, but they carried weight. Finality. Claire didn't reply. Footsteps shifted. The distance between them increased. The conversation was ending. Hunter spoke once more. "Just stay consistent," he said. "With what?" "With the story." Claire gave a faint, humorless laugh. Which version? Hunter didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was colder than before. "The one that works." The door opened. Footsteps. Then silence returned. But it was no longer empty. It was full, dense with meaning. Lydia remained still, unmoving, unresponsive. But inside, everything had changed. This was no longer suspicion, no longer fragments, no longer patterns waiting to be confirmed. This was knowledge, clear, structured, dangerous. And with that knowledge came a new understanding. Waking up would not protect her. Not yet. Because truth without proof could be dismissed, rewritten, controlled, just like everything else Hunter managed. No. If she was going to survive this, if she was going to make what she knew matter, she needed more. More words, more evidence, more time. Lydia Cross did not open her eyes. She did not move. But in the quiet of that hospital room, she made a decision that would reshape everything that followed. She would remain exactly where they believed she was. Until the truth they spoke so freely in the dark could no longer be denied in the light. Morning did not arrive all at once. It entered the room in layers, first through a subtle shift in temperature, then through the distant increase of movement beyond the door, and finally through light that filtered softly across Lydia Cross's unmoving face. To anyone watching, nothing had changed. Her breathing remained steady. Her eyes closed, her body still. But inside, Lydia had begun to organize the world again. Not emotionally, structurally. The night had given her something she could not unhear. Not just betrayal, but confirmation. The kind that replaced doubt with direction. Hunter and Claire were not guessing. They were operating. And Lydia, if she intended to survive what they had set into motion, would have to do the same. She began with what she could control. Time. Though she could not measure it precisely, Lydia learned to approximate its passage through repetition. The same footsteps at regular intervals, the same voices at predictable hours, the same routines carried out by hospital staff who did not realize they were becoming part of a pattern she was mapping carefully in her mind. Nurses rotated every few hours. Vitals were checked at consistent intervals. Medications administered on schedule. She learned the difference between urgency and routine by sound alone. A hurried step, a lowered voice. A door opened too quickly. These things mattered because they created contrast. And contrast, Lydia knew, revealed disruption. By the second full day, though, she could not be certain of the exact count. She had identified one voice that did not follow the same detached rhythm as the others. Dana Mercer. The name came from another nurse who addressed her in passing. "Dana, can you check room 412?" Footsteps followed. Measured, but not mechanical. When Dana entered Lydia's room, she did not move immediately to the monitors. She paused, just briefly, as if taking in the space before interacting with it. That pause mattered. Lydia marked it. Dana's voice when she spoke was calm but not distant. "Good morning, Lydia," she said, even though Lydia had not responded in days. There was something in the way she said it. Not expectation, recognition. As if Lydia were still present in a way others had already begun to disregard. Dana moved closer. Adjusted something IV line perhaps, checked readings. But unlike the others, she did not narrate everything clinically. She spoke quietly, not to be heard, but not entirely to herself either. "They say these cases can go either way," Dana murmured. A pause. "Sometimes people hear more than we think." Lydia did not react, could not. But inside, something aligned. Dana continued working her movements, efficient, practiced. Yet there was a subtle difference in how she handled Lydia, slightly more careful, slightly more attentive. As if she were not interacting with an object, but with a person waiting. When Dana left, Lydia returned to her internal mapping. Hunter's visits followed a pattern. Late morning, early evening, rarely at night unless accompanied by Claire. He spoke when others were present, asked appropriate questions, maintained the role expected of him. Concerned husband, measured, attentive. But when they were alone, silence. He did not speak to Lydia directly. Not anymore. As if the performance required an audience. Claire's visits were less consistent, more erratic. She stayed longer when she came, moved more, spoke more freely even when others were nearby. Her emotional expressions were less controlled, but still selective. Lydia listened, every word, every pause. She began to notice repetition in their conversations, not identical phrases, but themes, timing, documents, accounts, always returning to the same points, circling them without fully stating them when others could hear. And then when the room emptied, they filled in the gaps. On the third night again, measured not by certainty, but by pattern. Hunter arrived later than usual. Claire was already there. Lydia recognized the tension immediately. It was in the silence, before either of them spoke. Not comfortable, not aligned. Different from before. "What took so long?" Claire asked. Her voice was low, but sharper than usual. Hunter didn't answer right away. "I had to meet someone," he said finally. "Who, a lawyer?" The word settled heavily. Lydia focused. Claire shifted. "You said that was already handled." "It is," Hunter replied. "Then why?" "Because things changed," he interrupted. A pause. Claire's tone dropped. "Because of this?" A slight movement fabric, perhaps, as she gestured toward Lydia. Hunter exhaled. "Yes." Silence followed. Then Claire spoke again. "Is it going to be a problem?" Hunter hesitated, just briefly. "It complicates things," he said. Lydia registered the word. Complicates. Not stops, not prevents, adjusts. Claire moved closer, her presence sharper now. "You said we were covered." "We are," Hunter replied. "Then why do you look like we're not?" Another pause. Longer this time. Lydia counted it. Not in seconds, in breaths. "Final Fauchali," Hunter spoke. "Because we need to be careful." Claire let out a quiet, frustrated sound. "We've been careful. Not enough," Hunter said. The tension in the room shifted. Claire's voice lowered. "What does that mean?" Hunter stepped closer. Lydia could sense it from the change in sound, the proximity of his voice. "It means we don't talk about this here," he said. A beat. Then more quietly, not like this. Claire didn't respond immediately. When she did, her voice had changed again, less confrontational, more calculating. Then where Hunter didn't answer right away. "Somewhere private," he said. Claire gave a faint laugh. "This isn't private." Hunter's reply came without hesitation. No. The word was firm. Final. Lydia felt something shift again. A small fracture. Hunter was adjusting, becoming more cautious, which meant he was aware of risk. Claire seemed to realize it too. Her tone softened. "Do you think someone hurt us?" Hunter didn't answer directly. "I think we shouldn't assume they didn't." The room fell quiet. He wasn't speaking about Lydia, not consciously, but the implication remained. Claire stepped back. The sound of distance increased. "Okay," she said. A pause. "Then, what about the accounts?" Lydia focused again. Hunter's tone returned to controlled neutrality. "They're secure. You moved everything, yes?" Or another pause, where it won't be traced easily. Claire exhaled slowly. "And the insurance in progress. You said that before. And it's still true." Claire hesitated. Then, and Lydia. The question was different. Not about logistics, about outcome. Hunter's response came more slowly this time. "We wait." The same answer. But something beneath it had changed. Claire seemed to hear it too, for what she asked. Hunter didn't answer immediately. Then, for the right moment, the phrase lingered, ambiguous but deliberate. Claire didn't push further. Not this time. Instead, she moved toward the door. "I don't like this," she said quietly. Hunter didn't respond. The door opened, closed. Silence returned. But Lydia no longer experienced silence the same way. It was no longer absence. It was accumulation. Every word they spoke, every hesitation, every inconsistency. She was collecting them, organizing them, building something, not yet visible, but growing. And beneath it all, one realization, settled with absolute clarity: they believed time was on their side. But they were the ones speaking. And Lydia was the one remembering. By the time the fourth morning unfolded, though Lydia could only approximate its arrival through the repetition of sound and light, she had begun to understand that what Hunter and Claire were doing was not rushed, not chaotic, and certainly not impulsive. It was methodical. It carried the quiet confidence of people who believed that they had already accounted for most variables, and who were now simply adjusting around an inconvenience they had not anticipated. That inconvenience was her continued existence. Not her voice, not her presence in the room, not even her body as a person, but her unresolved status. She was neither gone nor returned, and in that uncertain space, she remained a problem they could not yet close. Hunter approached the situation as he approached everything else in his life, with control. Layered over control, decisions nested within contingency, each action designed to appear reasonable when observed from the outside. He spoke to doctors with calm concern, asking the right questions, in the right order, never appearing rushed, never pressing too hard, yet always steering the conversation toward long-term outcomes rather than immediate recovery. He asked about rehabilitation timelines, about cognitive impairment risks, about what legal authority might be needed if a patient did not regain full capacity. He did not ask whether Lydia would wake. He asked what would happen if she did not. And that distinction, though subtle, was something Lydia noticed immediately. Claire, meanwhile, moved through the situation differently. Where Hunter controlled, Claire adapted. She filled spaces that required emotional presence, speaking with relatives, responding to messages, updating friends who were not close enough to question details, but close enough to expect reassurance. She positioned herself as the bridge between Lydia and the outside world, answering questions on her behalf, softening narratives, shaping perception. "She's stable," Claire would say on the phone, her voice carefully balanced between hope and caution. "The doctors are watching closely. We're just waiting, waiting." The word repeated itself often. But Lydia had already learned that waiting in their language did not mean inactivity. It meant preparation. She continued to listen to Map to record everything internally with a level of discipline that felt almost detached from emotion. There was no space for anger, not yet. Anger required expression, and expression required exposure. Instead, Lydia relied on what had always defined her strength, her ability to remain still while everything around her revealed itself. It was during one of Dana Mercer's morning shifts that the structure of Lydia's situation shifted slightly, though not visibly to anyone else in the room. Dana entered with the same quiet pause Lydia had come to expect, as if acknowledging presence before interaction, and moved through the routine checks with practiced efficiency. However, this time, she lingered just a fraction longer near Lydia's hand, her fingers adjusting the position of the IV line before resting lightly against Lydia's wrist. The contact was brief, intentional, and different. "Vitals are steady," Donna said aloud, likely for documentation purposes, though her tone was softer than required. "No significant changes overnight." She paused, then added in a quieter voice, one that might have been mistaken for casual reflection by anyone listening casually. "Sometimes change doesn't look the way people expect." Lydia understood. Not the full meaning, not the intention behind it, but enough to recognize that Dinah was not entirely convinced by the narrative surrounding her condition. That awareness, however subtle, introduced something new into Lydia's calculations. Possibility. Not of rescue, not of immediate intervention, but of being seen if only partially by someone who was paying attention. Later that afternoon, Hunter returned earlier than usual, his footsteps sharper, more deliberate, carrying attention that had not been present in previous visits. Claire was already there, her voice low as she spoke on the phone, ending the call quickly when she noticed his arrival. "You're early," she said. Hunter did not respond immediately. Instead, Lydia heard the faint sound of papers being set down, followed by the measured exhale she had come to associate with his moments of recalibration. "We need to adjust," he said. The phrasing was familiar, but the tone was not. There was less certainty in it, more pressure beneath the surface. Claire moved closer. Lydia could hear the shift in proximity, the slight change in acoustics as their voices aligned. "What happened?" Claire asked. Hunter hesitated just long enough for Lydia to mark the pause as significant. "The bank flagged one of the transfers," he said. Silence followed. Not confusion, recognition. Claire spoke next, her voice lower now. "Which one?" "The secondary account," Hunter replied. "The one tied to the joint structure." Lydia felt the information settle into place, connecting to the earlier fragments she had gathered about accounts movements and reallocation. The financial irregularities she had noticed before the incident were no longer isolated. They were part of something larger. Claire exhaled slowly. "Did they freeze it?" "No," Hunter said. "Not yet." "Then what's the issue?" "They're reviewing it," he replied, "which means questions." Claire's tone sharpened slightly. "Can you answer them?" Another pause. "Yes," Hunter said, though the delay suggested complexity rather than confidence. But Claire pressed. Hunter's voice dropped. "But it means we need to slow down." The words hung between them. Claire did not like that. "We don't have time to slow down," she said. "We don't have a choice," Hunter replied. The tension shifted again, this time more pronounced. Claire stepped back, the movement audible in the space. "This wasn't supposed to drag out," she said. "You said everything would be in place before what?" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Hunter completed it for her, though not aloud. "We're still within range," he said instead. "Nothing has collapsed." "Yet," Claire added. The word lingered. Hunter did not contradict her. Instead, he redirected. "The insurance claim is still moving forward," he said. "That hasn't changed." Claire hesitated. And Lydia, again the question returned to its center. Hunter's response was slower this time. "She's stable," he said. "That's not what I asked." Lydia listened carefully. Every nuance mattered. Hunter exhaled. "If her condition remains unchanged, the process continues." Claire's voice dropped. "And if it doesn't?" Another pause, longer, more deliberate. Then we adapt, Hunter said. The same answer as before. But now it carried less certainty. Claire seemed to sense it. You keep saying that, she replied, but you don't say how. Hunter did not answer immediately, and in that silence, Lydia recognized something she had not heard before. Not control, not calculation. Uncertainty. Small, contained, but present. When Hunter finally spoke, his voice was quieter. You won't need to. Claire did not respond right away. Then softly, you're assuming a lot. Hunter's reply came with more firmness this time, as if reasserting control. I'm managing variables. Claire gave a faint, humorless sound. She's not a variable. The statement was unexpected, not because of its content, but because of its source. For a brief moment, something almost human passed through Claire's voice. Hunter responded without hesitation. Everything is a variable. The finality in his tone closed the space. Claire did not argue further. Instead, she shifted direction again. What about the paperwork, she asked. It's being revised, Hunter said. By the same lawyer, no. That answer came faster. Too fast, Claire noticed. You changed lawyers, she asked. Yes. Why another pause? Because I needed someone less visible. The phrasing was careful. Claire absorbed it. And that safe, Hunter's reply was immediate. It's necessary. Silence followed. Not comfortable, not aligned, but contained. Lydia listened to all of it, her mind moving through the information, not as a victim processing betrayal, but as an analyst assembling a structure piece by piece. Every hesitation, every adjustment, every inconsistency revealed something essential, not just about what Hunter and Claire were doing, but about where their plan was beginning to strain under pressure. And strain, Lydia knew, always led to mistakes. She remained still, unresponsive, exactly as they needed her to be. Because in their need for control, they had overlooked something fundamental. They were speaking, and Lydia was learning faster than they could adapt. By the time Lydia Cross reached what she estimated to be the 5th or 6th day of her hospitalization, her awareness had sharpened into something far more deliberate than mere listening. It was no longer passive reception of sound, but structured interpretation. She was no longer simply hearing Hunter and Claire. She was studying them, isolating patterns in their speech, their timing, their inconsistencies, and the subtle ways pressure was beginning to alter their behavior. Stillness, she realized, had become her greatest advantage. Not because it concealed her, but because it invited carelessness. People spoke differently in front of someone they believed could not respond. They did not filter as rigorously, did not construct their narratives with the same precision. They filled silence with explanation, assumption, and sometimes contradiction. And contradiction, Lydia knew, was where truth exposed itself. The room had grown familiar in ways that would have seemed impossible under any other circumstances. She could now distinguish between shifts in light without opening her eyes, recognize the difference between morning rounds and afternoon check-ins by the cadence of footsteps, and anticipate when Dana Mercer would enter based on the subtle lull that often preceded her arrival. Dana did not rush. She never did. That alone set her apart. On that particular morning, Dana's presence felt different before she even spoke. There was a hesitation at the doorway, not uncertainty, but intention, followed by a slower approach to the bedside. Lydia sensed the shift in the air, the faint displacement that came with someone standing closer than necessary. "Good morning," Lydia, Dana said quietly. There was a pause after the greeting, longer than usual, as if she were waiting not for a response exactly, but for something. Then came the routine. Vitals checked, lines adjusted, monitors reviewed. But midway through the process, Dana did something she had not done before. She took Lydia's hand, not in the clinical way of checking pulse or circulation, but gently, deliberately, her fingers resting lightly against Lydia's palm. The contact lingered for a moment longer than required. And then, a subtle pressure. Not enough to be noticed by anyone else. Not enough to trigger alarm. But enough. Lydia felt it. Not clearly at first, not with full sensation, but as a faint disturbance, like a ripple beneath still water. Dana released her hand almost immediately, continuing her work without comment. But Lydia understood. Not the full intention, not the certainty, but the possibility. Dana suspected. That knowledge altered everything. Because until that moment, Lydia had believed her awareness existed entirely in isolation, hidden behind the assumption of her unresponsiveness. Now, there was the potential, however fragile, that someone else might see through it. That meant risk, but it also meant opportunity. Later that day, Lydia tested the boundary. It was not a decision made impulsively. It was calculated, measured against everything she had learned so far about timing, observation, and consequence. Dana returned in the early afternoon, her footsteps as steady as ever, her presence marked by that same brief pause before entering fully into the room. "Let's check on you again," she said softly. The routine repeated. Vitals, lines, documentation. Then once more, her hand found Lydia's. This time, the pressure came again. Slight, deliberate. And Lydia, gathering every fragment of control she could access, responded. Not visibly. Not in any way that would alert the monitors or draw attention. But internally, she directed what little connection she had left toward her fingers. A fraction of movement. Barely there. More intention than action. But enough. Dana's hand stilled. For a moment, everything in the room seemed to hold its breath. Then Dana resumed her movements, unchanged, her voice calm. "No significant changes," she said aloud. But beneath that, in a tone so soft, it might have been mistaken for thought, she added, "I see you." Lydia did not move again. Could not. But inside, something aligned with new clarity. She was no longer alone. The alliance was unspoken, unacknowledged, but real, and it had to remain that way. Because exposure at this stage would undo everything. Hunter and Claire could not know, not yet. That night, their conversation returned, though altered slightly in tone. More cautious, more contained. They did not speak as freely as before, but the pressure of their situation continued to push them toward disclosure. Claire arrived first, her movements restless, pacing the room in short, uneven patterns. Hunter followed soon after, his footsteps slower, heavier than usual. "You took too long," Claire said. "I told you I had to meet someone," Hunter replied. "That's becoming a pattern," she said. "And so is this," he answered, his voice carrying a sharper edge than before. A pause followed. Not empty, charged. Claire shifted her approach. "What did the lawyer say?" she asked. Hunter hesitated. "Nothing we didn't already know," he said. "That's not an answer," Claire replied. "It's the only one that matters right now." Claire exhaled sharply. "No, it's not," she said. "I need to know if we're exposed." The word landed heavily. Exposed. Hunter did not answer immediately. When he did, his voice was lower. "Not yet. Not yet, Quo." Claire repeated. "That's not reassuring." "It's accurate," Hunter said. Another pause. Then Claire spoke again, quieter now. "The bank is still reviewing the transfer. I know. And if they escalate it, they won't," Hunter said. "You don't know that." "I do." Claire let out a small, frustrated sound. "You're assuming control you don't have." Hunter's response came quickly. "I've handled situations like this before." The implication was clear. This was not new to him. Lydia absorbed that detail carefully. It added depth to what she was already beginning to understand. Claire seemed to register it too. Her tone shifted before she asked. Hunter didn't respond. Silence stretched between them. "Then that's not relevant," he said. Claire laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. "It feels relevant." Hunter's voice hardened slightly. "It isn't." Another fracture. Small, but widening. Claire stepped closer. "And Lydia?" she asked again. The question remained central, unavoidable. Hunter's answer came slower this time. "She hasn't changed." Claire hesitated. "That's not true," she said quietly. Hunter didn't respond. Claire continued. "She feels different." The statement hung in the air. Not logical, not measurable, but instinctive. Hunter dismissed it. "She's unresponsive." "I know what they said," Claire replied. "That's not what I mean." Hunter exhaled. "You're imagining things." Claire asked. Silence followed, longer, more uncertain. Lydia remained perfectly still, but inside, her awareness sharpened further. Claire sensed something, not consciously, but enough to question. And questions Lydia knew could become dangerous. Hunter spoke again more firmly this time. "We stick to the plan," he said. Claire didn't answer immediately. "Then what plan?" she asked. The question was not rhetorical. It was a challenge. Hunter hesitated. And in that hesitation, Lydia heard something she had been waiting for. Not control, not certainty, but strain. "We've finished what we started," he said finally. Claire's voice dropped. "And if we can't another pause, then we will." The certainty returned, but it felt thinner now, less stable. Claire stepped back. "I don't like this," she said again. Hunter didn't respond. The conversation ended shortly after. Footsteps, door, silence. But Lydia understood something new now. Their control was not absolute. It was maintained. And maintenance required effort, adjustment, energy, which meant it could fail. She remained still, unmoving, invisible. But beneath that stillness, something had shifted irrevocably. She was no longer just observing. She was participating, quietly, carefully. And with every word they spoke, every mistake they made, every fracture that widened between them, Lydia Cross moved closer to a moment they did not see coming. By the time Lydia Cross began to regain fragments of control over more than just her awareness, the world around her had already shifted into a second phase one, in which the danger was no longer theoretical, but active, layered, and increasingly complex. Hunter and Claire were no longer simply speaking. They were adjusting. And that adjustment carried a different kind of risk. It meant they had sensed resistance somewhere in the system, even if they could not yet identify its source. Lydia understood that her advantage, stillness, invisibility, assumed absence, would not last indefinitely. It was a temporary condition, one that had to be used with precision before it expired. Dana Mercer understood that too. Their communication remained almost imperceptible, built on the smallest possible exchanges, each one carefully measured against the possibility of observation. There were no direct conversations, no overt acknowledgments. Instead, Dana altered small details, slightly longer pauses during routine checks, positioning Lydia's hand in ways that allowed minimal muscular response, adjusting the angle of her head, just enough to change sensory perception without alerting anyone else. It was within those controlled moments that Lydia began to push further. The first attempt had been nothing more than a fractional movement in her fingers, barely detectable, even to herself. The second attempt was more deliberate. She focused not on movement alone, but on repetition press, once pause, press again. Not enough to appear intentional to an outside observer, but enough for Dana to recognize pattern. Dana did not react outwardly, but she understood. The following day, Dana introduced something new into their silent exchange. A whisper placed carefully beneath the threshold of casual speech. "I'm going to adjust your positioning," she said aloud, her tone neutral, then quieter, almost absorbed into the rhythm of her breathing. "If you understand me, try again." Lydia gathered what little control she could access, directing it toward the same point, her fingers. The effort was immense, disproportionate to the movement it produced, but she did not allow that to disrupt her focus. Precision mattered more than strength. A faint pressure. Pause, then again. Dana's hand stilled. For a fraction of a second, then resumed its work. "Good," she murmured so softly it might have been mistaken for an exhale. From that moment forward, their communication became structured, limited, but intentional. Dana did not ask questions that required complex responses. She did not push for more than Lydia could safely provide. Instead, she established a simple system, 1 press for yes, 2 for no, with pauses long enough to avoid misinterpretation. It was inefficient, slow, but reliable. And reliability, Lydia knew, was what mattered. Over the next several interactions, Dana gathered just enough to confirm what she had already suspected. Lydia was aware she was listening, and most importantly, She was in danger. Dana did not react emotionally to that realization. There was no visible alarm, no sudden change in behavior that might draw attention. Instead, she adjusted her approach subtly, becoming even more consistent in her routines, even more careful in how long she stayed what she said and when she said it. The first time Dana introduced the idea of external contact, she did so cautiously. "I may be able to help you reach someone," she said quietly, her voice blending into the ambient noise of the room. "But we have to be careful." Lydia responded with a single controlled press. "Yes." Dana paused. "Do you have someone you trust?" The question lingered. Lydia considered it carefully. Trust was no longer a simple category. It required evaluation, risk assessment. But one name emerged with clarity. Not family, not friends. Professional, structured. Someone bound by process rather than emotion. She pressed once. Dana continued. Legal aid pause. Then Lydia pressed again. "Yes." Dana exhaled slowly, as if confirming something internally. "Okay," she said. "We'll take it one step at a time." That step, however, would not be immediate. Accessing anything outside the hospital environment required timing discretion and a method that would not leave a visible trail. Dana could not simply hand Lydia a phone or initiate contact directly without risking exposure. Instead, she began by gathering information names, connections, possibilities, through their limited system of communication. It took time, fragments, careful reconstruction. But eventually a name formed. Miriam Sloan. Dana repeated it quietly. Miriam Sloan. Lydia pressed once. Dana nodded slightly, though the gesture was subtle enough to go unnoticed by anyone not looking for it. "I'll see what I can do," she said. From that moment forward, the nature of Lydia's awareness shifted again. It was no longer confined to observation and memory. It had extended outward into the possibility of action, however delayed that action might be. Meanwhile, Hunter and Claire continued to operate under the assumption that Lydia remained entirely absent. Their conversations had grown more controlled, but not silent. Pressure had a way of forcing disclosure, especially when outcomes remained uncertain. That evening, their voices returned with a different kind of tension, less confident, more fragmented. "You should have told me sooner," Claire said, her voice tight. "I told you when it mattered," Hunter replied. "It mattered before now," she said. Hunter exhaled. "It matters now." Claire paced. Lydia could hear the uneven rhythm of her steps. "They're asking questions," Claire continued. "Not directly, but it's happening." "Who?" Hunter asked. "People who shouldn't be involved," she said. "That's vague," he replied. "It's accurate," Claire said sharply. A pause followed. Then Hunter spoke again. "The accounts are contained," he said. "They can't trace everything." "Not everything," Claire repeated. "But enough." Hunter didn't respond immediately. Lydia noted the silence. Claire pressed further. "And the emails?" Another pause. "I removed what I could," Hunter said. "What you could," Claire echoed. "That's not reassuring." "It's sufficient," he replied. Claire let out a short breath. "You keep saying that. And you keep questioning it," Hunter said. "Because things keep changing," she snapped. The tension in the room thickened. Claire stepped closer. "This isn't stable anymore," she said. "It's shifting." Hunter's voice dropped. "Then we adjust." Claire shook her head. Lydia could hear the movement in the air. "That's not a plan," she said. "That's a reaction." Another silence. Then more quietly, "What if she wakes up?" The question returned again. But this time, it carried more weight, more urgency. Hunter's response was slower. "If she wakes up, we manage the narrative." Claire laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You can't manage everything." "I can manage enough," he said. Claire didn't respond. Not immediately. "Then I think you're underestimating this." Hunter's tone hardened. "I think you're overreacting." Claire stepped back. "No," she said quietly. "I think you're losing control." The words landed. Heavy, precise. And for the first time, Hunter did not immediately correct her. The silence that followed was different from the others. Not strategic, not measured, uncertain. Lydia absorbed it fully, because uncertainty, once introduced, rarely disappeared. It expanded, and expansion led to fracture. She remained still, unseen. But everything she needed was beginning to take shape. Not through confrontation, not through exposure, but through accumulation. And now, for the first time, she was no longer gathering alone. The first time Miriam Sloane's name entered the hospital in anything more than a whisper, it did not arrive through the front desk, nor through official channels, nor even through a call placed in Lydia Cross's name. It arrived quietly, carried through discretion timing and the kind of procedural awareness that did not leave visible traces. Dana Mercer understood boundaries. More importantly, she understood how to move within them without triggering attention. She did not present herself as an advocate, nor did she step outside her role in any way that could be formally questioned. Instead, she relied on what the system allowed: information flow, professional courtesy, and the careful use of language that meant one thing to those listening casually and something else entirely to those who knew where to look. It began with a message, not sent directly, not from Lydia, but from Dana, framed as a general inquiry, a consultation, a question about patient rights in cases of prolonged unresponsiveness and potential financial exposure. It was enough. Miriam Sloane did not respond immediately. She was not the kind of attorney who reacted quickly to incomplete information, nor did she engage in situations that lacked structure. Her reputation had been built on precision, on the careful assembly of facts before action, and on an understanding that timing was often as critical as truth itself. But she did respond. Within 24 hours, her reply was measured, professional, and contained a single line that mattered more than the rest. If the patient has awareness, everything changes. Dana read the message once, then again. She did not show it to Lydia, not directly. Instead, during her next shift, she stood at Lydia's bedside, her voice low, her tone neutral. "I spoke to someone," she said as she adjusted the monitoring lines. A pause. She understands what this could mean. Lydia focused. Every word mattered. Dana continued. "But she needs confirmation." A longer pause. Then clear confirmation. Lydia understood the weight of that requirement. Awareness alone was not enough. It had to be demonstrable, reliable, defensible. Because in a legal context, uncertainty could be dismissed. And dismissal in Lydia's situation could be fatal. Dana placed her hand lightly against Lydia's again. "We can't rush this," she said quietly. "If we do it wrong, they'll shut everything down." Lydia responded with a single controlled press. "Yes." Donna exhaled slowly. "Okay," she said. "Then we do it right." The process that followed was slow, deliberate, and built entirely around minimizing risk. Dana did not attempt to prove Lydia's awareness in a single moment. Instead, she constructed a pattern repeated, documented, and subtle enough to avoid attention, yet consistent enough to form evidence over time. She began recording observations. Not formally, not in a way that would immediately trigger review, but in her personal notes. Times, responses, patterns of movement. Each entry was precise, objective, free of interpretation. She did not write "the patient is conscious." She wrote "patient exhibits consistent response to tactile stimulus across multiple intervals." Language mattered, because language could be challenged or defended. Meanwhile, Hunter and Claire continued to operate within the narrowing space of their assumptions, unaware that the structure beneath them was beginning to shift. Their conversations had changed again. Less open, more fragmented, but still revealing. On the 7th evening, though Lydia could only estimate the passage of time, the tension between them had sharpened into something less controlled. "You said the lawyer was handling it," Claire said. Her voice was low, but the strain beneath it was no longer concealed. "He is," Hunter replied. "Then why am I hearing from the bank again?" she asked. A pause. "They're reviewing standard discrepancies," Hunter said. "That's not what they said," Claire replied. Another pause. Lydia tracked it carefully. Hunter's voice, when it came, was measured. What did they say? Claire exhaled sharply. They asked about authorization. Silence. Then Hunter prompted. And I told them what we agreed on, Claire said. But they didn't seem convinced. Hunter did not respond immediately. The delay was longer than usual. Did you mention the power of attorney? He asked. Claire hesitated. Not directly. Why not? Because it's not finalized, she said. Another silence. Heavier. More significant. Lydia felt the shift immediately. This was not routine tension. This was structural. Hunter spoke again, his tone lower now. It needs to be finalized. Claire laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. It would be if things were going the way you planned. The words landed with precision. Hunter did not react immediately. When he did, his voice was sharper. They are going the way I planned. No, Claire said quietly. They're not. A pause. Then, she's still here. The statement did not require elaboration. Lydia remained still. But inside, the clarity of her position sharpened further. Hunter exhaled slowly. That doesn't change the outcome, he said. Claire stepped closer. Lydia could hear it in the shift of sound. It changes everything, she replied. Hunter did not answer. The silence that followed was not controlled. It was uncertain. Claire continued, her voice softer now. What if she wakes up and remembers the question was no longer hypothetical? It carried weight, urgency. Hunter's response came after a longer pause than any before. Then we manage it, he said. But this time, the certainty was thinner. Claire heard it. You keep saying that, she said, but you don't explain how. Hunter did not respond immediately. And in that silence, Lydia recognized something crucial. He did not have a complete answer. Claire pressed further. This isn't just about money anymore, she said. Another pause. Then it never was. Hunter replied. The words were quiet, but deliberate. Claire hesitated. What does that mean? Hunter didn't answer. Instead, he shifted. We need to stay aligned, he said. Claire let out a slow breath. We're not aligned, she replied. The statement lingered. Heavy, irreversible. Hunter did not contradict her. Instead, he said nothing. And that silence spoke more clearly than anything else. Lydia absorbed it all. Every word, every hesitation, every fracture. Because fractures once visible did not repair themselves. They widened. And in that widening, truth emerged. Later that night, Dana returned. Her movements were as careful as ever, her voice steady. I have enough to bring her in, she said quietly. A pause. But once she's involved, things move differently. Lydia focused. Dana continued. Are you ready for that? The question carried weight. Not emotional, practical. Because once legal procedure began, control shifted. Not entirely to Lydia, but away from Hunter, away from Claire. Lydia responded with a single, deliberate press. Yes. Dana nodded slightly. Okay, she said. And in that moment, the structure of the story changed, no longer contained within a hospital room, no longer limited to whispered conversations in the dark. It was moving outward, into systems, into records, into processes that did not rely on belief, but on proof. Lydia remained still, unseen. But now she was no longer waiting. She was preparing. Preparation did not announce itself. It did not arrive with urgency or visible disruption. Nor did it alter the outward rhythm of Lydia Cross's condition in any way that might alert those who believed they were still in control. Instead, it unfolded beneath the surface quietly, methodically, and with a level of precision that mirrored the very structure Hunter had relied on for a long. The difference now was that the structure no longer belonged to him alone. Miriam Sloan did not come to the hospital immediately. That in itself was a decision shaped by experience. Entering too soon without sufficient foundation would have risked alerting the very people she needed to observe. Instead, she began by building distance into her involvement, reviewing the preliminary information Dana had provided, cross-referencing public records, identifying legal vulnerabilities that might exist within the framework Hunter and Claire had constructed. She moved carefully, because cases like this did not hinge on what was suspected. They hinged on what could be demonstrated. and demonstration required sequence, documentation, timing. Within 48 hours of Dana's confirmation, Miriam had already identified several points of concern. Financial activity inconsistent with standard joint account behavior. Early-stage documentation suggesting attempts to establish expanded authority over Lydia's assets. Insurance inquiries initiated with unusual urgency relative to the timeline of her condition. None of it was on its own conclusive. But together, it formed direction. Back in the hospital, Lydia continued her role with absolute discipline. Her body remained unresponsive to all outward observation, her breathing steady, her movements non-existent, except for the controlled, nearly imperceptible signals she shared only with Dana. Every instinct that might have driven her toward immediate action was suppressed not out of fear, but out of understanding. Timing would determine everything. Hunter arrived that afternoon with a composure that to an untrained observer might have appeared unchanged. But Lydia, now deeply attuned to the subtleties of his presence, recognized the shift immediately. His footsteps carried a sharper cadence, his movements less fluid, as if each action required more conscious control than before. Claire followed shortly after. The tension between them had not resolved. It had evolved. "You didn't tell me about the second account," Claire said without preamble. Her voice was low, but it carried a firmness that had not been present in earlier conversations. Hunter paused. Lydia could hear the faint sound of something being placed on the bedside table, papers perhaps, or a phone. "It wasn't relevant," he replied. Claire let out a quiet, incredulous breath. "It's relevant now." A pause followed. Hunter's response was slower. "It's contained," he said. "That's what you said about the first one," Claire replied. Another pause, longer, more deliberate. Lydia tracked it carefully. Hunter was recalibrating. "You're reacting to pressure," he said finally. "No," Claire answered. "I'm reacting to inconsistencies." The word lingered. Inconsistencies. It was one Lydia understood well. Hunter did not respond immediately. When he did, his voice had shifted, less assured, though still controlled. "There are always variables," he said. Claire stepped closer. Lydia could hear the subtle change in proximity. "You told me everything was aligned," Claire said. "It is," Hunter replied. "No," she said quietly. "It isn't. The repetition mattered, because repetition indicated insistence, and insistence indicated doubt." Hunter exhaled. "We're still within acceptable margins," he said. Claire gave a faint, humorless laugh. "You sound like you're presenting to a client." The observation landed. Hunter did not deny it. Instead, he redirected. "We need to stay focused," he said. Claire did not move away. "On what?" she asked. Hunter hesitated. And in that hesitation, Lydia recognized something critical. He was no longer speaking from certainty. He was selecting responses. "On the outcome," he said finally. Claire's voice softened, but not with reassurance. "With what outcome?" Another pause. "Then, the one we agreed on." Claire didn't respond immediately. When she did, her tone carried something new, not just tension, distance. "I don't remember agreeing to this version," she said. The words were quiet, but they carried weight. Hunter's response came more quickly this time. "It's the same outcome," he said. "No," Claire replied. "It's not." Silence followed. Not controlled, not strategic, but fractured. Lydia absorbed it fully, because this was where structure began to fail, not in obvious ways, but in subtle misalignments between expectation and reality. Claire stepped back slightly. The shift in sound confirmed it. "You're changing things," she said. "I'm adjusting," Hunter replied. "That's not the same thing. It is when the situation changes." Claire let out a slow breath. "And what changed?" The question hung in the air. Hunter did not answer immediately. "Then this," he said. The implication was clear. Lydia, her condition, her continued presence. Claire's voice lowered. She wasn't supposed to stay like this. The phrasing echoed earlier conversations. But now it carried more urgency, more discomfort. Hunter responded carefully. She hasn't changed. Claire hesitated. That's not what it feels like. Hunter did not reply. And in that silence, Lydia recognized something that had not been present before. Claire's intuition, unstructured, unproven, but persistent. Claire continued. There's something different, she said. Hunter exhaled. You're projecting. Am I? She asked. Another pause. Then, yes. The answer came too quickly, too definitively. Claire did not argue further, not directly. Instead, she shifted again. What about the lawyer? She asked. Hunter's response was immediate. Handled. By the same one, no. The answer was sharp, clear, and revealing. Claire caught it. You switched again? She asked. Yes. Why? A pause. Shorter this time, because I needed discretion. Claire considered that. And you trust them? Hunter's voice steadied. I trust the structure. Claire let out a quiet breath. That's not the same thing. Hunter didn't respond. Because it wasn't. Silence returned, but it was no longer neutral. It carried the weight of everything that had not been resolved. Everything that could not be aligned. Eventually, Claire moved toward the door. I don't like where this is going, she said. Hunter did not stop her. The door opened, closed. Hunter remained. For a moment, he said nothing. Then quietly, we're close. The words were not meant for Claire. Not entirely. They were spoken into the room, into the space Lydia occupied, as if he were reinforcing something for himself, or for her. But Lydia did not respond. She did not move, because she understood something Hunter did not. They were not close, not to success, not to control. They were close to exposure. Later that evening, Dana returned. Her movements were calm, her expression unchanged. But her voice, when she spoke quietly, carried a subtle shift. She's ready, Dana said. A pause. She'll come tomorrow. Lydia focused. Every word mattered. Dana continued. But we need to be precise. She placed her hand gently against Lydia's. From this point on, everything counts. Lydia responded with a single, deliberate press. Yes, Dana nodded. Good, she said softly. Because what Hunter and Claire still did not understand, what they had never accounted for, was that Lydia was no longer just observing. She was building, and by the time they realized it, it would already be too late to change the outcome. The next morning did not feel different in the way mornings are usually recognized. There was no sudden clarity in the air, no shift in light that marked significance. No audible signal that something irreversible had begun. The hospital continued its rhythm with quiet efficiency. Monitors hummed, carts rolled across polished floors. Voices remained measured and professional. And yet beneath that surface, the structure had already changed. Miriam Sloan arrived without announcement. She did not check in at the front desk with urgency, nor did she request immediate access in a way that would draw attention. Instead, she moved through the system with a kind of familiarity that came from years of understanding institutional flow, who to speak to, how to phrase requests, when to wait, and when to proceed. She introduced herself not as a disruptor, but as a professional inquiry, a legal consultant reviewing patient rights, a quiet presence, contained. By the time she reached Lydia's floor, nothing about her presence would have appeared unusual to anyone not looking closely. Dana Mercer was. She met Miriam in the hallway, their exchange brief controlled and absent of anything that might suggest urgency. Room 412, Dana said softly, as if confirming routine. Miriam nodded. Thank you. No further words were needed. Inside the room, Lydia remained exactly as she had been, still unresponsive, outwardly unchanged. But her awareness sharpened immediately upon sensing the difference in presence. Miriam did not move like the others. There was no hesitation, no uncertainty, no performance of care. Only observation, measured, deliberate. She stepped closer to the bed, her gaze steady, taking in not just Lydia's physical condition, but the arrangement of the room, the positioning of equipment, the subtle details that others overlooked. Then, without ceremony, she spoke. Lydia. The name was not spoken gently, not clinically, but precisely, as if it mattered. There was a pause, not for response, but for confirmation of environment. Miriam continued, her voice low enough to avoid unnecessary attention, yet clear enough to carry intention. If you are aware, I need consistency. The words were direct, unambiguous. Lydia focused. Every fragment of control she had regained over the past days narrowed into a single point. Her fingers, the same place she had used with Dana, the same controlled signal. She pressed. Once. Pause. Then again. Not enough to appear accidental. Not enough to trigger alarm, but enough to establish pattern. Miriam did not react outwardly. Her posture remained unchanged. Her expression neutral. But she had seen, and more importantly, she had recognized structure. She stepped slightly closer, her voice even quieter now. We will not rush, she said. But from this point forward, everything must be verifiable. Lydia responded again. One press, pause, one press. Miriam straightened slightly. Good, she said. Then louder, returning to a tone that would not draw attention. I'll be reviewing your case further. The shift was seamless. Professional, contained. She turned and left the room without further acknowledgement. But the meaning of her presence remained, clear, irreversible. Outside, Dana waited only long enough for Miriam to exit before resuming her role. There was no visible coordination between them, no exchange that could be interpreted as collaboration. But the alignment was established. Inside the room, Lydia remained still. But everything had changed, because awareness had now been witnessed, not assumed, not suspected, documented, and documentation, Lydia understood, was the beginning of protection. That afternoon, Hunter arrived earlier than expected. His movements carried a sharper edge than before, his composure intact, but strained beneath the surface. Claire followed shortly after her presence, more restless, her steps uneven as she entered the room. You didn't tell me someone came by, Claire said immediately. Her voice was low, but tension threaded through it. Hunter paused. What do you mean? Claire stepped closer. There was someone here this morning, she said. A woman. Lydia focused. Every word mattered. Hunter's response was measured. Hospital staff, no. Claire said. She wasn't staff. A pause. What did she say? Hunter asked. Claire hesitated. Nothing specific, she replied. Just asked questions. Another pause. Hunter's voice lowered. What kind of questions? Claire exhaled. About Lydia. About her condition. About timelines. The word lingered. Timelines. Hunter did not respond immediately. When he did, his tone was controlled. That's normal. Claire shook her head. Lydia could hear the subtle movement. No, she said. It didn't feel normal. Silence followed. Then Hunter spoke again. Did she identify herself? Claire hesitated. No. Another pause. Longer, heavier. Lydia sensed the shift immediately. Hunter was recalculating. Then it's nothing, he said. Claire didn't accept it. It's not nothing, she replied. People don't just walk in and ask questions without reason. Hunter exhaled. We don't have confirmation of anything, he said. Claire stepped closer. But we have a pattern, she said. The word echoed. Pattern. Lydia recognized it, because she had built her entire understanding around that concept. Hunter's voice sharpened slightly. You're connecting things that aren't connected. Claire asked. Another silence. Then the bank, she continued. Lawyer. Now this. The sequence mattered. Hunter did not interrupt. Claire pressed further. It's not random, she said. Hunter's reply came slower. Even if it isn't, it doesn't change anything. Claire laughed softly. That's exactly what it changes. The tension in the room tightened. Claire stepped back slightly. You said we had control, she said. Hunter did not respond immediately. Then we still do. The words were firm, but Lydia heard the difference. The certainty was no longer absolute. Claire heard it too. No, she said quietly. We don't. Silence followed. Not controlled, not strategic, but fractured. Lydia absorbed it fully, because fracture meant exposure, and exposure once begun could not be reversed. Claire spoke again softer now. "What if someone knows?" she asked. Hunter did not answer immediately. When he did, his voice was lower. "Then we handle it." The same phrase, repeated, but thinner now, less stable. Claire did not argue. Instead, she shifted. "And Lydia?" she asked. The question returned as it always did. Hunter's response came after a longer pause than before. "She hasn't changed." Claire hesitated. "I'm not sure that's true," she said. The statement was quiet, but it carried weight. Hunter dismissed it. "She's unresponsive." "I know what they said," Claire replied. "That's not what I mean." Hunter exhaled. "You're imagining things." Claire didn't respond immediately. "Then I hope so," she said. The words lingered, because they were not a denial, they were uncertainty. And uncertainty, Lydia knew, was the beginning of collapse. The conversation ended without resolution. Claire left first. Hunter remained. For a moment, he stood in silence. Then quietly, "We're still in control." The words were spoken into the room, into Lydia's presence, as if repetition could restore certainty. But Lydia did not move. She did not respond, because she understood something Hunter did not. Control, once questioned, did not return through assertion. It required proof, and proof was no longer in his hands. Later that evening, Dana returned. Her movements were calm, her voice steady. "She's proceeding," Dana said quietly. A pause, carefully. Lydia responded with a single press. Dana nodded. "They're starting to notice," she added. Another pause. "That's expected." Lydia remained still. But inside, her awareness sharpened further, because what had once been hidden was now beginning to surface. Not through confrontation, not through accusation, but through structure, through pattern, through truth assembling itself in a way that could no longer be dismissed. And Lydia Cross, who had once been reduced to silence, was now becoming the center of a story they could no longer control. The moment Lydia Cross chose to open her eyes was not driven by emotion, nor by urgency, nor by any need to reclaim something immediately. It was chosen the way she had chosen everything since that first night, through structure, timing, and a precise understanding of when visibility would serve her better than silence. Up until that point, her stillness had been protection. From that point forward, visibility would become leverage. Miriam Sloane had made that clear without ever stating it directly. Evidence once sufficient required acknowledgement. Not theatrical, not dramatic, but undeniable. A shift from absence to presence that could not be reframed, dismissed, or controlled by anyone else. The timing mattered. It had to occur under observation, not just by Hunter, not just by Claire, but by people who existed outside their influence. Medical staff, documentation, witness. That morning, the room carried a different rhythm even before Lydia made her decision. Dana's presence was earlier than usual, her movements slightly more deliberate, though still within the boundaries of routine. There were additional footsteps in the hallway, voices that lingered longer outside the door, a subtle increase in activity that suggested coordination rather than coincidence. Miriam had arranged it. Not openly, not in a way that would draw suspicion. But enough. Dana moved to Lydia's side, her voice calm as she began the standard checks. "We're going to adjust your position," she said aloud. A pause, then quieter. "This is the right time." Lydia focused. Every element of her awareness aligned into a single point. She did not rush, did not react immediately, because timing, even within timing, required precision. She waited until the room reached a certain equilibrium, until the presence of others settled into place, until the background noise stabilized, until the moment felt less like an interruption and more like continuity. Then slowly, she opened her eyes. Not abruptly, not with visible strain, but gradually, as if emerging from something natural rather than forced. The light was sharp at first, unfamiliar after prolonged darkness, but Lydia did not react to it. She kept her gaze steady, unfocused for a moment, then gradually aligning with the space around her. Dana noticed first. Her movement paused, just slightly, then resumed. Controlled, professional. "Lydia," she said, her tone measured. There was no immediate response, because Lydia understood that awareness did not need to be proven through speech. Presence was enough. Within seconds, the room shifted. A second nurse entered, then another. Voices changed, not louder, but more focused. "Patient is responsive," someone said. "Eye movement confirmed. Notify attending." The words moved quickly, efficiently, entering the system that translated observation into record, and record into fact. Lydia did not speak. She did not move beyond what was necessary. Her eyes remained open, steady, tracking just enough to confirm consciousness without inviting interpretation. Hunter arrived less than 10 minutes later. His footsteps were faster than usual, not controlled, not measured, urgent. Claire followed close behind. The door opened. The air in the room shifted. Lydia turned her gaze, not quickly, not dramatically, but enough to acknowledge presence. Hunter stopped. The stillness in his body was immediate, absolute. For a moment, he did not move, did not speak, as if the structure he had built no longer aligned with the reality in front of him. Claire reacted differently. A sharp intake of breath, a step forward. "Oh my God, Lydia." Her voice broke at the right place. Not too early, not too late. But Lydia, now fully aware, recognized the performance within it. Hunter approached slowly, measured again, reconstructing composure in real time. "Lydia," he said, his voice carefully balanced between relief and control. Lydia looked at him. Directly, not with accusation, not with emotion, but with clarity. And that, more than anything, changed the dynamic. Because for the first time since the fall, Lydia was no longer an absence they could speak around. She was a presence that could not be ignored. Claire stepped closer, her movements less controlled now. "You're awake?" she said, her voice softer, almost trembling. Lydia did not respond, not verbally. Her silence now was no longer interpreted as incapacity. It was choice. Doctors entered. Questions followed. Routine, structured. "Can you hear me?" Lydia blinked once. "Yes," someone confirmed. "Can you follow movement?" She shifted her gaze, minimal, controlled, responsive. The room filled with process. Observation became documentation. Documentation became record. And record could not be undone. Hunter stood slightly back now, watching, assessing. His expression had stabilized, but Lydia could see the calculation behind it. The rapid reorganization of expectation, the adjustment of narrative, the search for control within a situation that had shifted beyond his design. Claire remained closer, her emotional display, continuing but less precise now, less certain. "Do you remember what happened?" the doctor asked. Lydia did not answer. Not because she couldn't, because she chose not to. Memory, like everything else, would be revealed on her terms, not theirs. Miriam entered quietly. No announcement, no introduction. She positioned herself where she could observe without interfering, her presence subtle but unmistakable to Lydia. Their eyes met briefly. And in that moment, understanding passed between them. Not emotional, not dramatic, structural. The transition had been completed. From silence to presence, from observation to participation. But Lydia did not rush forward. She did not speak, did not accuse, did not reveal. Because the power she had built did not come from exposure. It came from timing. And timing was still hers to control. Hunter stepped closer again, his voice lower now. "You're safe," he said. The words were automatic, expected. Lydia looked at him, steady, unblinking. And in that silence, something shifted again. Because for the first time, he did not know if she believed him. Claire reached for Lydia's hand. Lydia allowed it, but did not return the gesture. The difference was subtle, but undeniable. The room gradually settled. Doctors continued their assessments. Nurses documented. The system moved forward. And within that movement, Lydia remained exactly as she intended to be. Present, aware, and silent, because speaking would come later, when it mattered, when it could no longer be redirected, when everything they had said, everything they had done, could be placed into a structure that did not rely on belief, but on proof. Hunter and Claire stood at her bedside, still adjusting, still recalibrating, still believing they had time. But Lydia knew something they did not. The moment she opened her eyes was not the end of their control. It was the beginning of its collapse. Once Lydia Cross opened her eyes, the world did not rush toward confrontation. It did not erupt into accusation or unravel into immediate consequence. Instead, it tightened, quietly, precisely, like a structure being reinforced from within before pressure was applied from the outside. Her recovery, as documented by the hospital, was described as gradual but stable. That phrasing mattered. It allowed time. It created space for observation, for controlled interaction, and most importantly, for procedure to unfold without disruption. Lydia did not contradict it. She did not accelerate her progress in ways that might draw unnecessary scrutiny, nor did she delay it so much that it would appear inconsistent. She remained within expectation, just slightly ahead of it. That balance allowed Miriam Sloane to move, not publicly, not yet, but with increasing clarity. The first formal step did not involve Hunter or Claire directly. It involved record systems that existed independently of personal narrative and could not be influenced by emotion or performance. Miriam began by requesting limited access through appropriate legal channels, framing her inquiry as a protective review rather than an accusation. A patient with regained consciousness, recent financial irregularities, potential vulnerability. The request was narrow, but sufficient. Banks responded slowly, as they always did, but they responded. Flags that had been passive became active. Reviews that had been internal moved toward documentation. Transaction histories, once routine, were now examined in sequence rather than isolation. And sequence was where truth lived. Lydia, now more physically aware but still restrained in her expression, participated only where necessary. She confirmed identity. She acknowledged awareness. She responded to basic questions. But beyond that, she remained deliberate in her silence, because silence now had a different function. It was no longer concealment. It was control. Hunter adjusted quickly, faster than Claire. He resumed his role with renewed precision, stepping back into the position of attentive husband with minimal visible disruption. He asked doctors the right questions, remained present during key updates, and positioned himself as a stabilizing force within Lydia's recovery. But something in his behavior had changed. Not outwardly, but in its timing. He spoke less when others were present, listened more, observed, as if recalculating. Claire, on the other hand, struggled with the shift. Her emotional responses became less consistent, her tone fluctuating between relief and something less defined, something closer to unease. She remained close to Lydia physically, often sitting beside her, speaking in soft, reassuring tones. But the structure of her presence had changed. It was no longer just performance. It was uncertainty layered over performance. That difference mattered, because uncertainty led to error. The first significant break did not occur in the hospital. It occurred in documentation. 3 days after Lydia regained visible awareness, Miriam initiated a formal inquiry into the joint financial accounts. Not an accusation, not yet. A review, triggered by irregular authorization patterns. The language was neutral, but the effect was not. Hunter received notice that afternoon. He did not react immediately, but Lydia saw the shift, in the way his posture tightened, in the slight delay before he spoke, in the way his gaze lingered on his phone longer than necessary. Claire noticed it too. "What is it?" she asked. Hunter hesitated. "Nothing," he said. Claire did not accept that. "That's not nothing." Another pause. "Then it's a review," Hunter said. Claire's voice dropped. "Of what, the accounts?" Silence. Then why Hunter did not answer immediately. "Standard procedure," he said. Claire shook her head. No, she said. This isn't standard. Hunter exhaled. It's manageable. Claire stepped closer. That's what you said before? The repetition carried weight. Hunter did not respond. And in that silence, Lydia recognized something important. He did not have control over this. Not entirely. Claire continued, her voice quieter now. Is this because she woke up, she asked. Question hung in the air. Hunter's response was measured. No. But the delay before it mattered. Claire heard it. So it is, she said. Hunter's tone sharpened slightly. It's a coincidence. Claire let out a small breath. You don't believe in coincidences. Statement landed. Because it was true. Hunter did not deny it. Instead, he shifted. We stay consistent, he said. Claire hesitated. With what Hunter looked at her, and for the first time, there was no immediate answer. Lydia watched, silently, carefully, because this was where alignment began to fracture. Claire spoke again, softer now. I don't think we're saying the same things anymore. The words were quiet, but definitive. Hunter responded slowly. We are. No, Claire said. We're not. The silence that followed was not controlled. It was uncertain, and uncertainty was no longer contained. That evening, Miriam returned. Not visibly, not to the room, but through process. Requests expanded. Documentation deepened. Audio logs from the hospital visitor times, duration of stays were preserved. Security footage, routine but overlooked, was flagged for retention. Email recovery processes were initiated through legal channels, focusing not on content first, but on access patterns, deletions, and timestamps. Structure, sequence, proof. Lydia remained still, present, aware, but silent, because now the evidence was beginning to speak. 2 days later, the first confrontation occurred. Not emotional, not dramatic, procedural. Hunter was contacted formally. A request for clarification. Specific, documented, bound by process. He responded. Of course he did. Calm, measured. But Lydia knew something had shifted, because a response meant engagement, and engagement meant exposure. Claire reacted differently. What does this mean, she asked. Hunter did not answer immediately. It means we proceed carefully, he said. Claire shook her head. No, she said. It means something's wrong. Hunter's voice hardened. Nothing is wrong. Claire stepped back. You don't sound like you believe that. Silence. Then we're still ahead, Hunter said. The words were firm, but Lydia heard the difference. He was no longer certain. He was asserting. And assertion was not the same as control. Claire looked at him. Longer than before. Then I think we've been exposed, she said. The words settled heavily. Hunter did not respond. Not immediately. And in that silence, everything shifted. Because once exposure is named, it cannot be unnamed. Lydia remained still. But inside, the structure she had been building was no longer hidden. It was active, moving, expanding beyond the room, beyond their control. And for the first time, Hunter and Claire were no longer managing a situation. They were reacting to one. The hearing was not scheduled as a spectacle. There were no crowded hallways, no raised voices, no dramatic entrances designed to capture attention. It took place within the measured quiet of a civil courtroom, one that processed disputes through documentation rather than emotion, and through procedure rather than performance. The kind of room where outcomes were not declared loudly but established piece by piece until there was nothing left to contest. Lydia Cross arrived without urgency. Her movements were still controlled, her recovery visibly incomplete, but steady enough to confirm capacity. She did not rush her steps, nor did she rely heavily on assistance, though Dana Mercer remained nearby, not as a participant, but as quiet support. Miriam Sloan walked beside Lydia, not guiding her, not shielding her, but ensuring that every movement aligned with the structure already in place. Hunter was already there. So was Claire. They did not stand together. That more than anything revealed the current state of their alignment. Hunter maintained his composure. His posture unchanged, his expression neutral, in a way that suggested control even now. Claire stood slightly apart, her gaze shifting more frequently, her stillness less convincing. The distance between them was not physical alone. It was structural. The proceeding began without delay. No opening statements designed for persuasion. Only the presentation of facts. Miriam did not speak first. She allowed the framework to establish itself, the identification of parties, the confirmation of Lydia's capacity, the acknowledgement of the matter under review. Financial authorization, potential misuse of joint accounts, and the legitimacy of actions taken during a period of presumed incapacity. Language remained precise, neutral. But the weight beneath it was unmistakable. When Miriam spoke, she did not raise her voice. She did not dramatize. She presented sequence. On the date of Lydia Cross's hospitalization, she began a series of financial movements were initiated from joint accounts requiring dual awareness. Documents were submitted, records displayed, dates aligned. There is no documented confirmation of Lydia Cross's consent at the time these transactions occurred. Pause. Additionally, authorization processes appear to have been initiated prior to any formal determination of long-term incapacity. Another document, another sequence. Hunter listened. He did not interrupt. He did not react outwardly. But Lydia could see it, the subtle tightening of his jaw, the slight delay in his breathing, the way his focus shifted not across the room, but inward, recalculating. Claire watched differently. Her gaze moved between Miriam, the documents, and Hunter as if trying to reconstruct something that was no longer stable. Miriam continued. Further review of communication records indicates coordinated activity between Mr. Hunter Cross and Miss Claire Whitmore. The phrasing was careful, coordinated, not accusatory but precise. Emails appeared, recovered threads, time-stamped, incomplete in isolation, but in sequence clear. While individual messages may appear inconclusive, Miriam said their alignment across time establishes pattern. Pattern. The word settled into the room. Because pattern was not opinion. It was structure. Hunter was invited to respond. He stood, composed, controlled. The transactions in question, he said, were conducted under the assumption of medical necessity and financial continuity. His tone was steady, professional. He did not deny action. He reframed it. As Lydia's condition was uncertain, decisions were made to preserve stability. Miriam did not interrupt. She allowed the statement to settle. Then preservation of stability, she repeated, does not extend to unilateral control of jointly governed assets without verified consent. Another document. Authorization forms, partially completed. Time-stamped. Prior to medical confirmation, Hunter's expression did not change. But the structure around him did. Claire was called next. She hesitated. Not long, but enough. When she stood, her composure was less precise. Her voice softer, less structured. I followed what I was told, she said. The statement was immediate, reflexive, not prepared. Miriam did not challenge her directly. Instead, can you confirm your involvement in account access? During Lydia Cross's hospitalization, Claire paused. Then yes. Can you confirm communication with Mr. Cross regarding those actions? Another pause, longer, yes. The room remained quiet, not tense, not dramatic, but definitive, because confirmation was not accusation. It was alignment with evidence. Miriam stepped back, not physically, but procedurally. The structure had been established. Now it could not be undone. The judge reviewed, asked questions. Not broad, not emotional, specific, focused on sequence, on authorization, on timing. Each answer narrowed the space further. Hunter responded carefully. Claire less so. Their alignment fractured under precision. Small inconsistencies emerged. Not dramatic, but enough. Enough to disrupt the narrative they had maintained. Lydia remained seated, silent, present. She was asked only what was necessary. Confirmation of awareness, recognition of accounts, acknowledgement of absence of consent. Her responses were minimal, clear, undeniable. And that was enough, because the case did not depend on her speaking more. It depended on what had already been said, documented, aligned. The decision was not delivered as a moment of triumph. It was stated, measured. Based on the evidence presented, the judge said the court finds sufficient cause to restrict further financial control by Mr. Hunter Cross and to initiate formal review of all transactions conducted during the period in question. Pause. Additional proceedings may follow. The language remained procedural, but the meaning was clear. Control had shifted, not completely, not finally, but irreversibly. Hunter did not react, not visibly, but Lydia saw it. The stillness that was no longer control, but containment. Claire lowered her gaze, not in shame, but in recognition. The structure they had relied on had failed. Miriam gathered her documents, calm, unchanged. Dana remained where she was, quiet, observing. Lydia stood slowly, not rushed, not assisted beyond what was necessary. She did not look at Hunter immediately, nor at Claire, because acknowledgement was not required. When she did turn, it was brief, measured, not confrontational, not emotional, just clear. Hunter met her gaze. For the first time, without control, without certainty. Claire did not. The room began to empty. No one raised their voice. No one declared victory. Because this was not that kind of ending. It was not spectacle. It was consequence. And consequence did not need volume to be understood. Lydia walked out beside Miriam, her step steady, her posture unchanged. She did not look back, because everything that needed to be seen had already been revealed. After the hearing, nothing collapsed all at once. There were no sudden arrests, no public confrontations, no final statements delivered in crowded hallways. Instead, everything moved the way it had begun, through a process, through documentation, through the quiet, steady enforcement of what had already been established. Control had shifted, not dramatically, but permanently. Lydia Cross did not return to the hospital. By the time she left the building, her discharge had already been coordinated through proper channels. Her medical care transitioned into a private recovery arrangement that allowed both oversight and distance. Dana Mercer had ensured continuity of care without inserting herself into the outcome, and Miriam Sloan had arranged the necessary protections to prevent any interference during the early stages of Lydia's return to independence. Everything was done without spectacle. Because spectacle, Lydia understood, often invited resistance. Structure did not. The house she had shared with Hunter was not the first place she went. That decision had been made long before the hearing, though it had never been spoken aloud. The house, like everything else in her previous life, had become part of a framework that required review, not immediate reclamation. Instead, Lydia moved into a temporary residence arranged through Miriam's network, private, secure, and removed from the immediate reach of anyone who might attempt to reassert influence. It was not permanent, and it was not meant to be. It existed only as a transition point, a place where she could rebuild without interruption. The first days there were quiet, not empty, but deliberate. Lydia followed routines similar to those she had relied on before everything changed: structured mornings, controlled interactions, time set aside for review rather than reaction. Her physical recovery progressed steadily, but she did not measure progress in strength alone. She measured it in clarity, in the ability to sit without distraction, to read through documents without emotional interference, to observe without needing to respond. Miriam visited twice during that first week. Each visit was focused, efficient. There were no unnecessary conversations, no reassurances offered beyond what could be supported by fact. The accounts are frozen pending review, Miriam said during their first meeting. Access has been restricted. Lydia nodded. And the insurance, she asked. Suspended, Miriam replied, until the investigation is complete. A pause. Then Lydia asked. Miriam did not hesitate. Cooperating, she said. Partially. The word mattered. Partially. It indicated alignment, but not fully. Lydia did not ask more. because she understood what that meant. Claire was adjusting, positioning, trying to reduce impact. Hunter, on the other hand, had taken a different approach. He's maintaining his position, Miriam continued. No admission of wrongdoing. Lydia expected that. Denial was not weakness, it was strategy. What's next? Lydia asked. Miriam considered the question. Continuation, she said. Not escalation. The distinction mattered. Because escalation invited unpredictability. Continuation preserved control. Lydia nodded. That's enough, she said. And it was. Because she had never intended to dismantle everything at once, only to ensure that what had been done could not be hidden. Days passed, then weeks. The legal process continued, quietly, methodically. Hunter's influence diminished not through a single event, but through accumulation. Access removed, authority questioned, credibility reduced. Claire's position shifted further. Her cooperation became more visible, not out of loyalty, but out of necessity. Lydia observed all of it, through reports, through documentation, through structured updates that contained no interpretation. Only fact. She did not reach out to either of them, not because she was avoiding closure, but because she understood something essential. Closure was not something they could give her. It was something she had already created. The first and only direct interaction occurred nearly a month after the hearing. It was not planned by Lydia, but it was anticipated. Hunter requested a meeting. Through legal channels, structured, documented. Miriam presented the request without recommendation. You are not required to accept, she said. Lydia considered it. Not emotionally, structurally. What value would the interaction provide? What risk would it introduce? What would remain unchanged regardless of the outcome? After a moment, she nodded. I'll meet him, she said. The meeting took place in a neutral setting, a conference room. Quiet, contained. Miriam present. Hunter arrived on time, as he always had. His appearance was unchanged, composed, controlled, deliberate. But Lydia noticed the difference immediately, not in what he showed, but in what he no longer concealed. Uncertainty, subtle, but present. They sat across from each other, no physical barrier, but distance remained. Hunter spoke first. I didn't expect this to go this way, he said. The statement was simple, not defensive, not apologetic, but revealing. Lydia listened. She did not interrupt, because interruption was unnecessary. Hunter continued. I made decisions based on what I believed was inevitable. A pause. I miscalculated. The word mattered. Not wrongdoing, not guilt. Miscalculation. Lydia nodded slightly, not in agreement. An acknowledgement. That's accurate, she said. Her voice was steady, calm. Hunter watched her, as if expecting more, but there was no more, because she did not need to explain. He shifted slightly. I never intended. Lydia raised her hand, not abruptly, but enough. He stopped. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was final. I don't need an explanation, Lydia said. Her tone was even, without anger, without softness, just clear. Hunter did not speak again, because there was nothing left to say that would alter outcome. Claire did not request a meeting, and Lydia did not offer one. Some distances did not require formal acknowledgement. They existed, and that was enough. Weeks later, Lydia returned briefly to the house, not to reclaim, to conclude. She moved through the space slowly, not searching, not remembering, just observing. The structure remained the same, but its meaning had changed. She packed what was necessary, thus left what was not. No hesitation, no attachment, because identity, she understood now, was not tied to place. It was tied to clarity. When she left, she did not look back. Not out of strength, not out of defiance, but because there was nothing behind her that required acknowledgement. Her life moved forward, not dramatically, not visibly, but steadily. She resumed work, gradually consulting first, then returning to structured involvement once her recovery allowed it. Her routines returned not identical, but refined. more precise, more intentional. Silence remained part of her. But it had changed. It was no longer a space where things were hidden. It was a space where truth had been built and maintained, without noise, without spectacle, without the need to be seen. Because Lydia Cross did not need to prove anything anymore. Everything that mattered had already been made undeniable. In the end, there are stories that unfold loudly with confrontation and visible consequence. And there are stories that resolve in quieter ways, through patience, through observation, through the careful alignment of truth with structure. This was never a story about revenge. It was about awareness, about what happens when someone chooses not to react immediately but to understand completely. Lydia did not win by overpowering anyone. She did not expose them through anger or humiliation. She allowed them to reveal themselves, step by step, word by word, until nothing they said could be separated from what they had done. And when the moment came, she did not need to raise her voice, because the truth, once fully assembled, does not require force. It stands on its own. If you stayed until the end, you've already understood something most people overlook, that silence is not always weakness, and that patience, when guided by clarity, can be stronger than any immediate reaction. If this story stayed with you, you can leave a like not as approval, but as acknowledgement. And if you're watching from somewhere in the world, tell me where you are and what time it is for you, right now. Stories like this don't ask for attention. They ask to be witnessed. And if you choose to stay for more, you're always welcome here.